cards, not specifically how the cow actually interacts with the stalls, but we'll be assessing things like some of the resources that are provided within. So whether or not stalls are actually designed to minimize these kind of injuries, designed to minimize lameness within stalls.
Okay, so we're going to go into the details of each for today, except maybe lameness. That would be a whole, even probably more than one webinar.
Yeah, we'll touch on lameness. Lameness is a big issue, and that'll be hopefully the focus of maybe a coming webinar in the future. We're going to touch on it again at the end. But yes, we do realize that lameness is a big component of this and can't be forgotten, and then ties in with all of what we're talking here today.
Okay, so, but in the end, all these indicators that we're going to explore today should help us prepare for evaluation.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so let's start with injuries.
Excellent, yes. So
I think what he can't change the slide. What we're going to do first, again, we're going to have our participants work a little bit. We're going to display on the next slide. I think you need to move on to the, Steve. Yeah, okay. So you will see on this slide 4 images of Hock injuries. And we'll leave you a few seconds to observe them. And we're giving you a choice of answers, so take note of it, because when you have to answer the question, you won't see the images anymore. So basically, we're asking you which of these Hock injuries are unacceptable to your judgment. Is it A, is it ACND, AND, CND, or all the injuries? So in a couple of seconds, you won't see this slide anymore, and you'll be able to answer. All right, we'll leave you a few seconds. We'll see what everybody thinks. Okay, let's see. All right, so I think one person basically answered A. Most people, 62% of them, answered A and D, and about a third of the people answered A, C, and D, and only a few answered all of these. Which is the right answer, Trevor?
The right answer. Well, I guess it would depend on your perspective on things. However, typically, basically these 4 pictures represent a scale of basically Hock injury assessments that we do, ranging from a score of really 1 through 4, and in the view of ProAction, in terms of what has been decided from the animal care assessment program as part of ProAction, is that scores of A and D, so the 2 higher scores on that scale, have been deemed unacceptable. And so we're trying to look at and minimize the prevalence of those cows that are experiencing either basically or Hock injuries of that kind of score A and D, as you see in the pictures here on the screen.
So there's not really a wrong answer to this question, but based on what's going to be assessed.
Yeah, definitely. Like if you're not happy with any hair loss on the legs of your cows, that's a good thing, and that's something that we can look at. However, from a pure, I guess, scientific standpoint at this point, there's been research to suggest that particularly those cows that score with the A and the D, and if we actually see here on the screen now, we can see these scores, so basically scored as a 0, 1, 2, and 3. So the A and D were really score 2 and 3.
Right.
That we know that cows that score with those are going to be more likely to be more likely to have lameness and other things, and we'll talk through some of those things later. And so part of the process that went into deciding this was we have this good scoring system. So this is a scoring system that's been developed over time by a number of researchers, where we can use fairly standardized pictures like these to actually assess the health of the hocks of cows, in this case the prevalence of injuries. And so a score of 0 is really a very clean looking leg, no swelling, good hair coat, and no lesions on the leg. Score 1, again, we would deem acceptable, having some hair loss but no real swelling, no lesions presence. And then it's where the cutoff becomes, or where we've deemed unacceptable, is when we start to see cows with not only hair loss, but we also see swelling and or a lesion on the leg, so an open wound on the leg of the cows. And probably even more so unacceptable is when we actually see major swelling of that hock occur, as you see here in the fourth picture, in addition to potentially balding or a wounded area on the legs of those cows.
All right. Do we know how many of each type or the worst types of lesions that we do have in our barns?
So we do have good estimates. We know that we have a number of studies that have been done over the last number of years to assess this. One big study was one done here in Canada as part of the Dairy Research Cluster that was funded primarily through the Dairy Farmers of Canada, as well as a number of partners. And so that study, which involved a number of institutions, researchers from across Canada, did a survey and looked at the prevalence of things like injuries, like lameness, management, housing, etc., on Canadian dairy farms. In particular, they had a sample of about 240 dairy farms across Canada. Over half were freestall barns, 140, of which about 30 of those were robotic milking facilities, and then about 100 tie stall barns. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you that. But before we get there, I think we have a question about your perception of the prevalence of hock injuries on your farms.
So we are going to display a question for you to assess or estimate, I should say, in your perception today as we are talking, what's the percentage of your cows in your herds showing injuries of score 2 and 3, so the two worst ones with swelling or lesions. And the choice of answers is 0 to 10%, 11 to 20, 21 to 50%, or 51% or more. So we're leaving you a couple of seconds, and we want to know what you think is the percentage of cows with score 2 or 3
on any basically any of their rear limbs. So
rear limbs. Yeah. All right. All right. Okay. And while we're waiting for the answers, we have a question. So maybe we can. Yes, actually, in this guide that. Sorry? Oh, yes, I will repeat the question. Sorry. So is it possible to obtain a copy of this scoring system for teaching purposes or any purpose in your own barn? Actually, in this guide to cow comfort that you have access through this webinar or on the Dairy Knowledge website, even on the Valacta website in French and in English, all the details for injury assessment, not only for hock but also for knee and neck, they're all there. So you can, it's for yourself to use, and it's free of charge. Yes. So, okay, do we have an answer? All right. So Trevor, 54% answered 0 to 10%. 31% answered 11 to 20. Why are you smiling? And 15%, 21 to 50%, and nobody said 51% or more. So what's the, I was going to say real situation, but let's say what's the situation, or what did we observe in those 240 herds in the study? Which normally represents.
Yeah. So I guess going back to our study, so which we felt and all the research involved was a very representative sample of farms here in Canada. And so the reason I'm smiling is that either the producers that are participating in today's webinar are the best of the best that we have in Canada, or they're being very optimistic in terms of the level of hock injuries in their cows. And so when we actually look at the percentage of cows that were scored with any hock injury in Canada, whether that be in tie stall farms or in freestall farms, we are around 50% of all the cows that were scored in that study. And so this might come as quite a shock to a number of people that we're observing that many cows with hock injuries on our farms in Canada. And often it's that I think one of the reasons why there's this discrepancy potentially between even the results of the survey that we just had versus what we're seeing here is that producers become, in some cases, accustomed to seeing Hock injuries and not really taking a critical look at the legs of their cows and actually identifying some of these Hock injuries that we have. And so when we've done this study, there's been some follow-up work as well as work out of the United States as well as out of Europe, all showing very similar levels of Hock injuries. So this isn't unique either to us here in Canada.
All right, we have a question.
When was the study and how much change do you expect and how fast after the implementation
So the study, the question is, when was the study done and how long basically after making changes, in particular implementation of programs like CQM, Canadian Quality Milk Program, as well as the ProAction Program, would we expect improvements to occur? And so the original study, the data collection portion of this study started around 4 years ago already.
Yes.
And since that time, there's been, and a number of things that we're presenting today are some of the results of that. Since that time, actually, there's been follow-up studies initiated to actually look at that, to actually track, particularly on some farms, how progress has been made and linking that back to some improvements in barn design. And definitely, yes, we can see that even within a 2-3 year period of time with producers that have made modifications to their housing, to their management, we actually see improvements in those rates. And the goal would be that as we implement these programs as well, and particularly the ProAction Animal Care Assessment Program, that we should be able to observe changes in the prevalence of these things over time. And that part of that program is not only to identify these as being issues on farms, but actually be able to track on individual farms so that we can make continuous improvement on our farms. And so we can identify where issues may lie and then make recommendations so that farmers can improve their situation on their farms. And what's unique about this data, which is, I think, is really good, which we have on the next slide here, is that not only do we have, I guess, what we could consider a fairly high prevalence of Hock injuries, but we see a big range across farms in Canada. So again, all our producers who voted for 0 to 10%, might actually be right. Yes. And so because if we look at the data, and what you see here is the same data, but basically the percentage of injured cows with scores 2 and 3 across all our sample herds, whether or not they're from, again, from tie stalls, free stalls, or in this case from robotic or automated milking farms. And what you see here is it broken down into 3 categories. So basically our top 25% of herds, our middle 50% of herds, and then our bottom 25% of herds. And what you see across all these herds and the different housing and milking systems is that there's a lot of variability. So ranging from anywhere from 0 to 10%, 20% in the top 25 to herds with up to 65 to 85% in our bottom herds. And so while that does tell us that, or I guess it tells us a number of things. It tells us that we not only have a huge range to work from, so saying that some producers are doing very well, so we can learn from those producers. What are they doing well that's limiting the amount of Hock injuries on their farms? And then we also have producers that aren't doing as well. And so that is also an opportunity for us to learn what are the factors then associated with those high prevalence rates, and can we then use that knowledge to make recommendations to producers? And that's going to be a focus of ours, particularly in this series of webinars, in terms of identifying some of those factors and helping producers who have struggles with these kind of things, with these Hock injuries, with other injuries on their cows, in terms of identifying areas where we can make improvements.
We have a question from the audience. Yes.
Yes, so sorry, so the question that just came over was, do these numbers, do they represent basically all Hock injuries or just scores 2 and 3? And as you can see here on the screen, hopefully you can see on your screen at home, is that these represent basically any cows with a score, an injury score of 2 or 3.
We have another question.
Under correction, will the expectation be zero incidence of Hock?
Good question. I'll let you answer that one.
No, the
Well, just repeat the question.
oh, sorry. The question is, under pro-action, will the goal be to have zero incidence of Hock injuries? And I guess the answer is that the goal of the pro-action is to reduce that prevalence, and so we're going to target reducing that prevalence. So even if you have very good, we want to help producers get even better, and then particularly, and the focus will be on those farms that are within that bottom percentile here, that bottom 25th percentile, is to assist those producers in terms of getting them to get out of that bottom 25th percentile and getting out of that. So yeah, there's no, at this point, the gold standard or the gold target is not 0%, but it is to reduce the prevalence that we have on our farms.
Right. So you were talking just previously that at the population level, and we've started to monitor this already, we can expect a change, an improvement in terms of prevalence of Hock injuries at the population level over a couple of years. But at the farm level, if you make a change, you can see difference within weeks.
Well, with injuries, it'll take a little bit more time because injuries, as to ourselves, when you have an injury, it doesn't miraculously cure overnight. It takes time, and that's actually one thing we still are learning more about is how long it actually takes for things like Hock injuries to actually fully heal on cows. So when we see a Hock injury, we don't actually know exactly when it occurred. It could have occurred in the last week. It could have occurred actually a month ago, and so some of these things take time. Wounds take time. Hair takes time to regrow. So it's not a magic thing that's going to disappear overnight on farms either.
We have a question.
Does the herd in the top 25 also have the highest meat production in the herd?
So does the herd, do the herds in the top 25 also have the highest production? Oh, do we know the answer to this?
So the question was, do the herds, in the top 25 percentile, are they our highest producing herds? And that is a very good question. Unfortunately, we don't have the answer to that. No. I don't know if that would be possible in this case. As part of the cluster project, that individual production numbers were not recorded on those cows, either at a cow level or at a herd level. However, it may be potential to actually go back into that data set and actually pull those numbers, if these farms are all on milk recording, to actually get those numbers and do those kinds of analysis. Sometimes those analyses are very difficult to do because there's a lot of variables and factors that influence milk production that would have to be controlled for in this case in terms of differences between farms and production systems. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be done, but it hasn't been done to date with this data set.
So you were saying that in the end, the whole point of assessing Hock injuries, for instance, is not about just saying, oh, I have Hock injuries or punishing ourselves, but about finding what are the potential causes for these injuries and hopefully being able to improve the housing system. So what are the causes to Hock injuries? And I think before you answer this question, we're going to ask the participants because it's the whole point of it. Yeah. We want everybody to think. Do we have? Well, we have a lot of questions, and I think what we're going to do, we're going to keep a few for the end of the day if we want to move on, for the end of the webinar, sorry. And if we do have some time left, because we still have lots to talk about. So let's throw in the question, what are the causes for Hock injuries? All right, so among these elements that you see in the choices there, which ones, according to you, cause Hock injuries? So you have different choices for every choice. I'll read them to you. Not enough bedding, stall too large, worn out mattress, short neck chain, brisket board too high, stall too narrow, and then the last choice, slippery surface or stall too short. And what do people think is the answer? Oh, we're waiting for everybody to answer. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Do you know what the answer is? All right. So most people, 70% answered the first answer, which, well, let's explore what are the answer. And actually, I don't, oh yeah. So not enough bedding, stall too large, worn out mattress.
So basically, all of those, well, actually not all of those, but some of those could be potential risk factors.
Right.
So not enough bedding, definitely. So one of the primary reasons why we see hock injuries on cows is basically that the cows are rubbing their leg, rubbing that hock on something in their stall, particularly often the stall surface. It could be stall hardware as well. But the more abrasiveness there is between the leg of the cow and whatever surface that leg is rubbing up against, the greater the chance. So if we've got a stall with very little bedding and they're rubbing on something that's quite abrasive, whether that's hard ground, concrete, or even hard mattresses, we might, without any cushion in between, we're going to increase, and we have good data to suggest that we're going to increase the risk of hock injuries in that situation.
What about stall too large?
Stall too large, there's no data to suggest that that would be the case. Stalls being too big for cows, in my opinion, aren't a problem, with the exception of the fact that when we make stalls very large, cows actually, and I guess that's a benefit, cows actually use them a lot, but they also then make them dirty. And that's, I guess, a whole discussion for another day, but we have to find that balance where we can make stalls big enough that they get used well, and then we have to maintain those stalls as well. But in the case of actual causing injuries, not a problem for cows. And then the last one there was a worn out mattress, and definitely it's the same thing going back. If we've got a surface, particularly a mattress that's old and becoming hard and more abrasive, we're going to increase the risk of injury on our cows.
All right. So if I understand well, because of the stall too large, this wasn't the right answer.
No.
So most people got it wrong. Okay, the second one, short neck chain, brisket board too high and stall too narrow.
So these could all be potentially a source of hock injuries in cows. So basically, if your neck rail or neck chain is too short, basically in a tie stall situation, we could impede the movement of the cow, which would again cause the cow to maybe make unnecessary movements, or movements where it's difficult for them to maneuver well in the stall, which would then potentially increase their risk of an injury. Having a brisket board that's too high, whether or not that's in a free stall or even a manger curb that's too high, say in a tie stall, if that's too high and the cow can't move their legs well, they can't stretch their legs, they'll often maybe have to put it over top, which again might increase the risk of them actually abrading their leg against that and rubbing. So you wouldn't see it on the backs of the back legs of the cows, but you actually might see that hair loss occurring and lesions occurring on the front legs of the cows in that scenario. And then the last one there, sorry, was
stall too narrow.
And same thing with too narrow of a stall. Basically, if the cows, and we'll talk about the movement of cows in stalls in a few moments, but if cows can't get up and down well because their stall is too narrow, they're again going to have restricted movement, increase them rubbing on different stall components and increasing their risk of injury.
So this second choice was the right answer.
Well, it'd be one of the right answers, yes.
One of the right answers, all right. And what about the third choice, which was the slippery surface and stall too short?
Yeah, and again, a slippery surface is going to increase the risk of slips and falls in the stall itself, which could potentially lead to injuries on the cow, not only to the hocks of the cow, but other injuries, knee injuries, which we'll talk about in a few moments. And then too short of a stall is really the same thing, particularly if the cow's hanging off the back of the stall and they're actually rubbing against that back portion of the back curb of the stall, and that's going to increase the risk of injury occurring to the hocks of the cows when they're rubbing up against that portion of the stall.
Okay. So you were talking about knee injuries coming up. Let's do that. Let's move on to knee injuries. how do we assess them?
So again, I think we forgot to mention, but the three components of the ProAction program when assessing injuries are actually assessing the hocks of cows, assessing the knees of cows, and assessing the necks of cows.
Okay.
And so we've dealt with the hocks. Next is the knees, and so the knees of the cows is basically a similar scoring system on a scale of 0, 1, 2, and 3, where basically a score of 0 is, again, no swelling, no hair loss, no lesions. A score of 1 where we might see some hair loss, again, no swelling. And then it's really 2 and 3, which we would classify similar to the hocks as being unacceptable, where we start to see swelling of the knees. We might have some hair losses. We might even have the development of some kind of lesion to the skin of the knees or hardening of the skin of the knees. And then in a 3, we might actually see major swelling. That's when you see the knees really ball up, as you see in the picture there, as you get swelling, as you get fluid building under that knee, and they might be associated with either hair loss or a wound associated with that area as well. That could be indicative of just simply swelling and inflammation or infection of that area as well.
So how many of these, what's the prevalence of these knee injuries in our herds?
Similar to the prevalence of Hock injuries, we see quite a few cows in Canada. So again, this is data from our original cluster project where we see over 30%, a little bit higher in tie stalls, so over 40% of cows in tie stalls with knee injuries, and in our freestall herds about 30%. Okay. Likely related to, again, potentially some of the risk factors, different risk factors that we might have for these two different scenarios. So the causes, again, are going to be quite different. And I think, do we have another question?
Yes, I think we're going to go again and ask our participants, what are the causes to knee injuries? So Steve will show you the question. So among these elements, which ones cause knee injuries? First choice, surface too hard, slippery alleys, cows too heavy. Second choice, not enough bedding, neck chain too short or stall too short. And then the third choice is tie rail too far, bottom of feed bunk low or short neck chain. All right, we'll leave you some time. It's coming. Traveling all across Canada, these answers, so that's pretty neat. All right. So for the first answer, the quarter of our participants answered that the first choice is the right one. Is that so?
So again, I would say that for this one, I would say 2 out of 3 of those responses are correct. So obviously a hard surface. So knee injuries are primarily caused by contact between the knee of the cow and the surface that they're lying down on, and repeated exposure of hard contact between the knee and the surface that it's contacting. So any type of hard surface, again, with lack of bedding or lack of cushion is going to increase the risk of that injury. Same thing with a slippery surface.
That's more in the alley.
Yeah,
we're talking.
Yeah, slippery surface, but even in the stall itself, if the stalls are wet, particularly sometimes mattresses can be wet and become slippery. The chance of the animal going down harder, specifically when it's lying down, is going to increase, and you're going to increase the risk of an injury. In terms of the weight of the cows, we'd like to blame it on the cows, but I don't think this is a real concern for us. So we've got all cows of sizes and shapes, but the surface that the cow is lying down in should be made and should be maintained to manage or handle the weight of that animal. So it's not really a cause, but it's really a result of the housing not being able to adapt or sustain the weight of that cow. So I'd say that would be the one answer in that question that probably isn't a good reason why we see knee injuries in cows.
All right. So as for the second choice, most participants thought that it was the right answer. So 55% of them.
So yeah, again, a poor quantity of bedding is going to relate to the hardness of the surface. If we don't have much cushion, we know that the more bedding we get installed, the more cushion there is. We're going to come back to this in our subsequent webinars, but we know that that bedding provides a lot of cushion. So if we don't have that, we're going to increase the risk of injury as the cow lays down. The long neck chain in tie stalls, that one I would potentially argue against in terms of having a direct impact on knee injuries. However, if the cow does have an excessively not long neck chain, that could cause the cow to have basically be able to turn around more into the stall, potentially have that chain hook on things like stall dividers, like the water bowl, which then might cause other injuries or might make it more difficult. So not a real direct cause of knee injuries, but could indirectly cause other problems for that cow in that stall. And I think the last one there is the stall too short. And again, we'll talk about the cow rising and lying down in a few moments, but anytime when that stall is not designed well enough in terms of giving that cow enough space to get up and down properly, it's going to change the way that the cow gets up and down, and potentially it's going to increase the risk of that cow going down harder and actually causing an injury as she lays down.
So were they right? Was this the right answer?
Well, I don't know if it's right, because I'd say the chain length is potentially an indirect effect there. And then the last one, our last ones are the tie rail not forward enough. Again, same thing.
Actually, too far. Tie rail too far.
Oh.
Well, that's what's written here. Anyway,
too
that's
far.
What they read. But maybe
so
it's a mistake there.
So the tie rail too far forward.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe there was a mistake in the question, so that might have
misled that's true. So I would say that if the tie rail probably being too far forward isn't bad, but if it's closer to the cow, and again it's restricting the size of the stall, making it more difficult for the cow to get up and down, it's gonna be more difficult. The feed bunk, and that's what we see in again, not a free stall problem, more of a tie stall problem, where if you don't have that height differential between the stall surface and the feed bunk surface, you're going to end up seeing cows that are leaning on their knees trying to eat, so actually trying to reach. And so you'll actually see these cows sometimes kind of propped up in their stall where they're actually leaning on their knees, and that's going to put undue pressure. They shouldn't have to do that to eat their food. And it also might be a function of food availability. So if their food's not pushed up enough and they're having to reach for that food, they might actually do that in that case as well. And then same thing, again, another tie stall reason would be the neck chain being too short. And again, if it's too short, it's going to be more difficult for the cow to get up and down properly, and potentially increasing the risk of impact, or a harder impact, as she does get up and down.
Okay. So in theory, this was the right answer, but there might have been a little problem.
Yeah. So there's elements of truth in all these answers, really.
Yeah, and the whole purpose of this actually was just for us to explore the different causes and possibilities. And at this point, I would like to tell you that again, in your guide to cow comfort in the barn, all the ideas of possible causes for every type of injuries are in the guide, so this might be a good start for you to explore what are the possible causes. Now let's move on quickly to neck injuries.
So the third thing that was evaluated, particularly in the cluster project, and will be part of the animal care assessment piece for ProAction, will be the assessment of neck injuries. And again, neck injuries we can score basically on the abrasion to the neck area of the cow. So here, the scoring system that is used is a 0, 1, 2 score, where 0 is basically no hair loss, very nice looking neck of a cow. Score 1, maybe a little bit of abrasion, hair loss, but again, no swelling, no lesions, so not a big concern. But where we have concern is these score 2 cows, where it's a little bit difficult to see in the picture, but where you actually see some swelling occurring. They may have a bald area. You might see actually baldness, or again, a callus forming on the neck of the cow as it rubs on some kind of surface, neck rail or whatever else. Kind of a hard callus crust on the neck of the cow, or a lesion, and resulting swelling associated with that. And
are there many of these injuries in our herds?
Well, again, thankfully not as much as some of the injuries that we see to the legs of cows. but our numbers are still reasonably high. So we see about 30% of cows in tie stalls with these types of injuries, as well as about 10% in free stalls. One of the reasons I think we see them more prevalent in tie stalls is because the cow is always at typically something that is going to potentially influence the prevalence of those injuries. So in a tie stall, the greatest risk factor is the neck rail or the attachment piece for the chain of the cow. And so if the cow's in a tie stall and that
Changing the foot, yeah.
neck rail is not positioned properly, or there's something there that's going to cause that cow to be continually rubbing up against, that's going to potentially cause problems. So often it's a neck rail that's too low or one that's not offset forward enough. So it's basically too close to the cow, which is going to cause that cow, whenever she's up to feeding, to put pressure on it, as well as when she gets up and down, that she puts pressure on it. We see these in freestall farms as well. So, and again, there it could actually be from two sources. So sometimes it's from the stalls, the free stall itself, where the cows might actually be putting pressure on, but probably more prevalent or more of a risk factor is actually the neck rail at the feed bunk. So in free stalls that have feed bunks where the cows' necks are rubbing up against the feed barrier, often a rail type system, where the cow is going to be rubbing up against that and potentially causing injury. And again, the position of that neck rail has a big impact. If it's too low and it's not pushed far enough forward, if it's not offset, it's going to increase the risk of the cows injuring themselves on that neck rail. And then same with the tie stall as well. If the feed that's available to the animal is not pushed up frequently, if the cows don't have access to that feed and they're continually having to reach for their feed, they're going to be putting undue kind of stress and pressure on their neck, in between, on that neck rail or on that rail at the feed bunk, and actually increasing the risk of injury in that case as well.
Now we've talked about hock injuries, knee injuries, neck injuries. Those are the three types of injuries that are going to be evaluated in ProAction. Does this mean that we ignore any other type of injuries?
No, definitely not. And so yeah, those are the injuries that are focused on in the ProAction Animal Care Assessment Program. Largely because we can tie those specifically to a number of housing factors, again, that we're going to be talking about in this webinar series, like stall design, like bedding comfort. But definitely there's a whole bunch of other injuries which we can note in our cows that we need to be aware of and that we need to be looking out for and looking for potential causes of those injuries. So sorry, just an example, we have some pictures here of, in this case, an injury to the backs of cows. You can see two cows where you see some abrasion, you see a lesion actually that is likely in this case resulted from the stall divider there. So rubbing on there, or whether or not the stall is too small and they're rubbing up against it, or there's some imperfection on it that's causing the cow to actually cause that lesion on the back of the cow. Often we can see lesions on the insides of the legs of the cows as well, not just the outside of the hocks. We typically focus in the assessment, it's going to be focused on the outside of the hock, but the inside can be just as susceptible. Again, if the legs of the cows are rubbing up against things that are like the stall surface as she's getting up and down, or stall components, we also see these lesions occurring in the inside of the legs of the cows as well. Other injuries can occur anywhere else on the body of the cow. And again, an example here, just some type of cut or lesion that we see here on the side of the cow, just behind the hook bones of the cows, where obviously this cow likely hooked herself onto something,
caught the nail, or
caught something, caught something in the barn. So again, if we see this on a cow, we might try to identify that. If we see this on a bunch of cows and we know there's something in the barn where the cows are rubbing up against, they're getting caught on, that we need to then look for, identify, and actually do something about. And then the last example that we have is a teat injury. And
I hope you're done your sandwich.
Yeah, this is kind of a graphic picture, but teat injuries are quite, I don't know the numbers, but we hear and see enough of them that they are a concern as well. From reports from producers as well as veterinarians and some research, we know that it's not always to blame on other cows. It's often cows stepping on their own teats that are causing these types of injuries. And a lot of that has to do, again, with the design of the stall. If cows are not getting up and down properly, if they're struggling and they're having to really cramp their bodies and push down hard as they get up, they're going to increase the risk of causing an injury to their own teeth like this.
So we can't blame it on the neighbor.
No, we can't. Not all the time.
Yeah, most of the time. All right, we got about 20 minutes left. We're now going to move on to the second indicator. We spent a lot of time on injuries because we think that it's probably an easy thing to observe and to link to possibilities of improvements in the housing. But how can getting up and lying down tell us about how a cow is comfortable or not?
So I think going back, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things is we can look at basically the end results of some of these things, like injuries, like lameness, but a lot of these things are caused by the behavior of the cows themselves and how the behavior responds to the environment of the cow. And so we know that when cows stand up and lie down, so when they get up and lie down, they go through a very systematic kind of behavioral repertoire to get up and down. So if you watch a cow, she should go under this very kind of systematic approach in terms of getting up and down. Should be very rhythmic, should be very smooth. And when we start to see deviations from that, we don't see the cow lunging forward far enough, or her struggling to get her back end up or get up on her knees and kind of wait there before she gets up. We notice then that there's an issue with her motion, and likely related to the environment that she's in that's causing her to have difficulties in terms of getting up and getting down.
Now, for an expert like you, it might be obvious when a cow lies down or rises up, that something is wrong in her movements, but I find that it's not always easy to analyze. So is there something
No, it's not easy. And again, if you really watch cows, it becomes more, I guess, easy to start to identify when cows aren't getting up and down properly. One of the most simple ways that we can do is simply just time actually how long it takes cows to get up and down.
Okay.
And so there's some evidence to suggest from the scientific literature and some of the programs that are out there that cows only need a very short period of time to either stand up or lie down. So anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds to stand up, or really under 5 seconds to lie down in a proper manner. And when we see cows deviating from this, we see them taking long periods of time to do that, to either stand up or lie down, then we know that there's probably some kind of inadequacy in the environment. And again, and I think we'll show you some videos, one of the nicest places for us to actually observe these things, not only the timing, but just the fluidity of the motion of the animals, is actually watching a cow get up in her natural environment. And so that natural environment is a pasture environment for the cow.
Right.
And so some of our best observations of what is normal for a cow comes from that pasture environment, where we can see cows getting up and down in a very fluid motion. And we can time it in that sense too. So I think we're going to...
How handy. We do have a video of a cow on pasture. I think Steve is going to show us in a few seconds. Yes. Okay. So it's a cow rising up here on pasture. It might be a little...
So this looks like a super cow that's basically jumping up. But it is a little bit disjointed. But what you see in this case, and you can see the time on the bottom, is that the cow will typically take a little bit of a lunge forward. You'll see her head kind of move up and then move down and take a swing forward, and at the same time you'll see the back end of the cow come up, and then her basically start to put pressure on her front knees and then pop herself up. And in this case, so you can see on the video, and this isn't, again, because of the video speed of the internet here, I think it's looking a bit shaky, but if you see the time there, it's taking this cow just over 2 seconds to get up.
Amazing.
Literally, this cow basically just kind of gets up and walks away from her spot. And this is a big cow that we're seeing in this case doing this here. So this would be what we'd expect a cow to do when she's standing up.
Okay, let's see now in a farm environment, in a barn environment. All right. So this cow here, she's on sand. Looks like a pretty new barn.
Yeah, so again, it looks like a nice, comfortable lying surface for the cow. But in this case, if we watch it here, if you follow the time on the bottom, what you see is it's taking this cow much longer from the first initial point where this cow starts to make a motion to get up to the point that she's actually fully standing is almost 7 seconds longer. It's over 9 seconds that we see this cow.
Maybe it's just a lazy cow?
Well, could be. Not all of us get out of bed in the morning at the same rate,
No.
I guess, right? But in this case here, you can actually see some differences in terms of the way the cow's getting up. You see the head of the cow. She first actually kind of looks to the side. If you look at the front of the stall, and these are things we'll talk about, there's a post there that might be deterring her a little bit. There's a neck rail, which you can't see in this case, which is pushed quite far down and far back in the stall, and she's really having to move her body in order to avoid that when she's getting up and down.
Okay.
And again, simply by, in this case, we don't even have to analyze the motion, but just the amount of time it's taking her, we can see that she's not getting up and down as well as she should be in this environment.
Just hearing everything that you mentioned here, there are a lot of ideas of what we could do, and it's not really something that's complicated to improve in this housing system.
No, and in this case, it would be just making sure that the cow's got enough space. So making sure that that neck rail is pushed forward. It's high enough that the cow is not impeded by it as she gets up and down. Right. There is a strap there in the front of this freestall, right. Return strap. In this case, it's actually quite high, so it's I would say it'd probably be the lesser of the concern. Often we see these straps right at the face level of the cow, and when they're at the face level of the cow, then it becomes very difficult for the cows to actually lunge and make that proper motion.
All right, now let's see a cow lying down on pasture, and that's a huge cow.
Yeah, so again, another cow on pasture, a good environment for us to watch. And again, what you can see here is that it's taking this cow, in this case, just over 4 seconds. So you're seeing about 4.23 seconds for this cow from the moment we see her kind of making a motion to lie down to the point where she's down on the grass. Again, a fairly fluid motion as she goes down, first going down on her knees and then dropping down completely. And this looks quite different. We'll show you a video of a cow lying down in a freestall where it looks quite a bit different than that and takes a bit longer.
Same freestall that we just saw.
So this is the same barn that the other video was from. And in this case here, you see this cow start to make motion and start to nose the stall already right at the beginning of the video where the timer starts. And as you watch her, again, it's a little bit slow, but in total, it takes this cow, as we watch her now, she's still looking around, she's still making motion. It takes her about, I think it's about 29 seconds to lie down in this case. So almost.
So why were we starting to count like?
So basically we see her at this point, we actually see her start to make movement with her feet and actually make movement with her head. Actually, she kind of noses the ground and then she starts making movement with her front feet. You actually see her scoop some sand out in this case, trying to get in. And then as she gets into the stall, you can see her hunch up because of the position of that neck rail. You see her body basically hunch up. And then as she starts to try lie down, you actually see her just now actually push her head to the side because there's something in front of her that's basically restricting her head movement where she's kind of pushing herself off to the side before she gets down on her front knees. So something's obstructing her, and I can't see in this case what's exactly in front of her, but there's something obstructing her from wanting to lie down as smoothly as she should in that case.
Now, maybe a cow that doesn't have like enough space to lie down or rise up, it takes more time, but don't we just want them to just lie down or rise up? I mean, at the end of the day, why should we care? Hold on a second. So, here. Steve, I think we can change the slide.
Technical difficulties, sorry again. We're going to get you there.
Our technician was sleeping. We just woke him up. No, he's pretty busy. All right. Okay, but maybe we can
so
Steve can change
we'll get there. So so the question was asked by Julie that a cow just needs to get up and lie down, but we know that even though a cow spends about half her day, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second as well, about half her day lying down, she doesn't just do that in big stretches of time. She actually gets up and down probably 10 to 15 times per day.
Wow, little
And
naps.
yeah, little naps basically across. Some are longer, some are shorter, but she's going to spend anywhere from half an hour to an hour and a half, 2 hours at a time, and then she needs to get up and down. And what we know from, again, from research and so results of the latest cluster project, so an analysis that's coming out of Laval University, where they've actually shown that cows that don't do this as often, so the cows in our data set that don't do this as often, so less than or equal to 6 times a day, so if they're having basically longer individual bouts of lying, not getting up and down as often, their risk of being culled from the herd went up by 102%.
I see. So a cow that's not allowed to rise or lie down this amount of time is not allowing us to reach our objective of having.
Truly, yeah. So these cows are actually getting removed sooner than later from the herd, and reducing our ability to keep that cow in the herd and keep on producing milk, and profitable milk for us in our herds.
Right.
When we think about the time budget of a cow, as I mentioned before, we typically talk about cows spending about half their day lying down, about 12 hours per day lying down, and they have to spend other parts of their day doing things, but they do have some flexibility, a little bit of flexibility in that as well. And we know that they do spend a bunch of time standing up doing nothing as well during the day. And so our goal should be thinking about, how do we make sure that the cow is maximizing the amount of time that she wants to be able to lie down in that stall and stand on a comfortable surface, lie down in a comfortable surface. And there's reasons why that's important. Not only do we know that things like lying time are related to lameness, and we can talk about that later as well, but we also know that cows that either spend very long periods of time of the day or very short periods of time of the day are at increased risk of being culled. And so again, from our cluster data set, they've showed that basically these cows that are either spending very short periods of time of the day or very long periods of time have an increased risk of being culled. And that could be due to a variety of reasons. There's been a number of studies prior to this which have showed that those are also the cows that are more likely to be lame. And so a lame cow who is lame might spend long periods of time laying down because she doesn't want to get up and down. So she also may not want to rise up and down as frequently. So going back to the less frequent bouts of getting up and down. Same thing with a cow that spends a very low period of time lying down. She might also be at more risk of getting lame because she's spending more time standing on hard surfaces, increasing her risk of becoming lame because of that standing behavior as well.
Okay, so we have a question, but I think what we're going to do, we're going to go through our whole content, and at the end we'll take all the questions. So please keep sending your questions, and we'll answer all of them at the end.
Excellent.
So a cow that has enough rest during the day is more likely to stay longer in the herd. Is she also more likely to produce more milk?
That's a good question. There's been some controversy about this. However, when we look at cows, particularly cows that are spending at least 10 hours a day, and this is data that comes from Dr. Rick Grant from the Miner Institute in the United States. They've done a number of studies looking at time budgets of cows and looking at the relationship of those time budgets with things like production and efficiency. And in one of their analyses where they did a meta-analysis of a bunch of studies putting data together, they actually showed that kind of within the range of lying time between about 10 hours and I think it was up to 15 hours of rest time per day, they saw about a 1.7 kilo an increase in milk for every additional hour of rest. And within that data set, what I think that's telling us is that these cows, which are fairly high producing cows, by getting them off their feet, getting them to spend more time resting, more time ruminating. We know that cows spend the majority of their time ruminating while lying down. It's going to be very important for them to maximize basically the efficiency of their rumination process, get the most value out of their feed, and potentially maximize their production as well.
Okay. So the third element that we can have a look at to give us clues as to our cows are comfortable or not, are the behaviors.
Yeah.
We're going to go them very quickly,
yeah.
Trevor.
Sounds good. No, I think this is important. Just to point out a few things. So for freestall farms particularly, we see a little bit of this in tie stalls, maybe where the stalls are very short and cows are standing on the back gutter, but more common in freestalls, we see this 2-foot standing or perching behavior in cows, as you see here in this picture.
That's pretty common.
It's very common, and one of the things that we know is that perching behavior is a behavior that has been linked to other issues. So a number of epidemiological studies have shown a link between this and foot problems in cows.
Right.
Cause and effect is not always known. However, there is some indication that it might actually be the behavior leading to the actual development of pathologies. And so the thing that we know is that it is the stall itself, it's the design of the stall, and we'll talk more about this in subsequent webinars, that actually causes this behavior. So having a stall that's too short, particularly a neck rail that's positioned too aggressively to keep that cow back in the stall is, or out of the stall basically, is going to promote that behavior. Other things that we see in free stalls, cows lying diagonally, so not lying completely straight in their stalls, often into each other's stalls. And again, this is going to be a function of the size of the stall. If the cow in this case can't fit in the stall well, she's going to position herself sideways. She's going to get herself in the space of the other cows, as well as if she doesn't have enough room at the front of the stall, because she knows that when she gets up and down, if she's lying straight in that stall, she's going to bang into that wall as she tries to get up and down. In this case, if she's diagonal, she can at least then kind of lunge herself into the neighboring stall and be able to get up without as much.
Basically, just trying to find the longest.
Yeah, the longest spot that she can find within that environment as well.
All right.
Another example. This is probably less frequent, but you often see this. You walk into a barn and there's always that one cow who's lying backwards in a stall, and sometimes more frequently in certain barns or not. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. Again, what this should signal to us is that there's something wrong in the environment of the cow.
She's just not stupid?
No, I don't think so. Often, though, it could be a learned behavior. And so if calves and heifers have been kept in pens where, again, they're kept with inappropriate stall designs for kind of their size and their age, they're not going to learn to lie down in them properly, and that behavior might carry over time. Or in the case of this, if in this case I'm not measuring it directly, but it doesn't look like there's a lot of headroom at the front of that stall. If the cow figures that she can't lie down straight in that stall facing the right way and get up and down properly, maybe she's lying backwards because it's much easier for her in this case to get up and down that way. So again, gives us a clue about the proper design of that stall.
And last but not least,
so this is another picture just showing us how cows might actually change where they might lie down in relation to the design of the stalls and the environment they're in. So you can see here this kind of alternating pattern, and we often see this where you see every second stall full. And really, basically, there's no cows that are nose to nose. And again, this is likely related to the fact that there's not enough room at the head of that stall. So if the cows were head to head, they'd basically be touching faces or noses, and it makes it very difficult for them to get up and down in that case. And the problem with this is that if this is fine if there's twice as many stalls as there is cows, but most of our barns aren't like that. So as the stalls start to fill up, cows might either again lie down and have more difficulty getting up and down because they don't have that lunge space, or they might make that choice not to lie down because they don't want to lie down in the space of someone else.
And then finally, lameness. You've said it before, it's very, very important, and we're not going to talk about it very much today, luckily, because we got 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
But I just want to know at this point, is it, like, how important is it in our herds in Canada?
Well, lameness, just like injuries, is very important for us to consider. And again, we're going to spend more time on this in the coming webinars, hopefully. But we know that lameness affects large numbers of cows. And this is results, again, from the cluster that have been recently published, where we have about 20% of cows in tie stalls, 23% in free stalls. These numbers are actually a little bit lower than some of the more recent estimates. So we've had some estimates in the almost 30 to 40% range in the past. And so, and when we talk about this, this isn't just cows that are walking around on 3 legs, kind of limping obviously, but these are cows that are showing any kind of gait abnormality. And so we know this is an issue because that lameness that we see in these cows is also linked to other things. Not only increased risk culling, which again is going to influence longevity of cows, but we also see it tied into things like Hock injuries.
We've talked about
yeah. So we saw this in this study. We've seen it in other studies where there's a relationship between these things. And so our focus then has to be on, okay, we know these things are related. We know that there's probably factors that are common to these different conditions, and so we have to then focus on identifying what those factors really are.
And those are data just published.
Yeah, so that was very new data, and so what we're using that data now for is identifying, and that's something we're going to be going for in the coming webinars, is actually identifying, now that we know that we have a problem, we know that we have to be looking out for injuries, lameness, looking at the behavior, we can assess the behavior, we can see what cows are doing, we can then go and think about what we can do to correct that. And so that's going to be really the focus of our last two webinars.
Right, which are going to be on March 31st. This second webinar will focus on the surface, and the third webinar will be on April 6th, and we'll focus on the space, so all the dimensions, and is it large enough, not enough, whatever. So we'll really go into the details and give examples and possibilities for all of these topics in the next two webinars. But before we leave you today, we have a homework for you. We are going to ask you, and since maybe you told us that you thought there are not very many Hock injuries in your herd, we suggest that you go check just in case, and just choose 20 cows and assess the hind limbs, and pick the hind that has the highest score and note it. The homework is in the webinar, the documents of the webinar. It's also going to be on the Dairy Knowledge website. We suggest that you do it before the next webinar, because we are going to ask you what's the percentage of your cows that you've observed among those 20 cows have a score of 2 and 3. So all the material is provided. You also can look in your guide, and if you have any questions, you can send us questions all the time too. As I said before, all the material, the slideshow, the guide, the homework, even the code of practice, I think, and all the videos that we've shown today are on dairyknowledge.ca. Thank you very much,
no
Trevor.
Problem.
We
Thank
sure
you.
had
That
a
was
lot
good.
to say, and we have questions pending. And if you have any other questions, Trevor's plane is only at 4, and his cab's
we got
coming
time.
at 2, so we got time. So first question, please, Steve. Sorry.
Is there a difference also
So is there differences in stall surfaces that cause injuries?
Definitely, and this is something we're going to go into very much more detail on the next webinar, so on the webinar 2. So without stealing too much from that and giving a lot of specifics, what I will say is that, and I did mention that earlier, is that basically the more abrasive the stall surface is, the greater risk, and more abrasive and harder that surface is, the more risk. So we know that regardless of the stall surface, the more bedding there is on top of it, the softer it's going to be, the less risk we have of injuries in cows. Again, whether that's a deep bed system where the more bedding we add there, whether that's a mattress-based system or you've got some kind of other mat or concrete underneath, the more cushion we can get on there, the better. And the less abrasive that surface is as well. And so we tend to see particularly less lesions or say less injuries in farms that have well-cushioned systems, particularly with lots of bedding, and specifically in our deep bedded type stall systems.
All right.
Is the line time 14 hours different in size stall?
Okay, the lying time, the 14 hours that we suggested today, is it different for
Yeah,
title?
and that 14 hours is really the upper, kind of the upper end that we would expect to see cows lying down. I would suggest that for most of the data that I've seen and that I've collected in studies is that that number would actually be more representative of tie stall farms.
Okay.
So we
So it
might,
is different.
yeah, because the cow is in her stall potentially for a great proportion of the day, we actually would almost expect that cow to have a little bit longer lying time in a tie stall than in a free stall where the cow is being moved for milking and might spend a greater portion of the day actually moving to different parts of the pen, etc. So we might see lying times a little bit actually lower in a free stall environment than say a tie stall environment.
All right. All right. Do we have any other questions? Two more.
Is there a recommendation for cow tie stalls that the cow has opportunity to exercise?
Oh, are there any recommendations to? Oh, sorry, not done. Okay, so are there any recommendations in terms of exercise for cows in tie stalls? And is lameness a measurement of exercise?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. From a personal standpoint, I like to see cows get exercise daily. So cows that are in tie stalls to be let out at least once daily to gain that exercise. At current, we have no requirement for that exercise in our code. In a lot of countries where they have different codes of practice or different standards for animal care, we actually see a requirement for exercise in dairy cows. That being said, I think it is an important thing. It's something we haven't studied enough of yet, and I think we can do more research on. As far as the link with lameness, again, I don't know if we have any studies that have provided a direct association between those things, but just anecdotally, again, from experience, what you can see is that those cows that don't get exercise on a daily basis, they tend to be a lot more crampy, and whether or not, and it could be a different type of lameness, so not a lameness directly originating from the hoof of the animal, but it might be more in the joints and the hips of the cows, where those cows that aren't exercising on a regular basis, they start to stiffen up, their joints don't work as well, and they display lameness as a result of that.
Just like we'll be when we'll get up in a few minutes.
Yeah, sitting here for a couple hours.
Okay, well, as we said, Trevor's cat's not here yet, so we're good. Are there any studies on water beds?
So good question. Again, I think the research that I've seen that have involved water beds have been more herd level type studies, epidemiological type studies where water beds were one type of bedding surface that has been evaluated, in addition to other types of mattresses, whether or not they're hard rubber mats or softer type mattresses, or compared against deep bedding systems. And basically, from the results of those studies, what I've been able to garner and conclude is that typically they perform very similarly against other types of mattress type systems, but again, dependent on the amount of bedding that's on top of them. And we'll come back to this in our next one, but really often it comes back to how much bedding we can keep on top of those mattress systems. And one of the challenges with a water mattress type system is actually keeping the bedding on top of them, because they are fluid and they are moving. To keep a reasonable amount of bedding that's going to provide comfort, that's going to provide absorption for moisture, becomes a little bit more difficult for those bedding systems.
And indeed, we will try to offer a comparison between the different types of surfaces and mattresses in our next webinar. Next question. The tricky one. Oh, is there a best freestall mat over the other? That's actually one question that we're going to try to answer in our next webinar.
Yeah, so
but for now.
So I guess for now, I'm not going to give you one recommendation. I guess from my perspective, it comes down to softness. So the softer that surface is and less abrasive it is. So there's a whole bunch of products out there on the market. and really the softer that surface can be, the less abrasive that surface can be, the better it is. And at current, again, and I'll say that from what the research has shown is that the only true gold standard of making sure that surface is soft and less abrasive is to make sure we have bedding on top of that surface and a reasonable amount of bedding that provides cushion and provides a soft surface for that cow to be on.
Good question. So do we expect the lying time to be the same between heifers and multiparous cows? Okay,
very good questions. Yeah, so some mixed results from a number of the studies that have been done. So comparisons between first lactation and older cows, so primiparous versus multiparous cows. Typically what we see is actually the primiparous cows in some cases, or I shouldn't say typically, but in some studies we've actually seen that they lie down a little bit longer than multiparous cows. There could be some reasons for that, and it actually relates to the stage of lactation as well. So if you look at lying time across lactation, we typically see actually that lying time starts to increase as the cows go further in their days in milk. And one of the reasons for that is actually in early lactation, there's a lot more pressure on that animal to actually be up on her feet. So an animal that's earlier in lactation that is producing lots of milk has to eat a lot as well. And to eat a lot, they have to be spending time on their feet and at the feed bunk, particularly in a freestall environment. So we actually see higher lying times kind of in those earlier lactation cows when we look within a herd versus later in lactation. And we sometimes see similar effects when it comes to first lactation versus older animals, where the first lactation animals might actually lie down a little bit longer because they might not be as high producing, as well as, and this could be related to housing and mixed group scenarios too, where they might actually be under more competitive pressure from older cows. So they might actually choose to lie down at certain time periods of the day or choose to lie down after milking rather than eating because of competitive pressure from their older counterparts within their pen.
A comment? Are there ways to keep the shavings in the stall? Yeah, because that's an issue.
Yeah, no, very good. And I think again, well, I was gonna say we're gonna hopefully cover a bunch of this in the next one. We should have just done them back to back, right? So
right, stay here all day.
No, but very good question. Again, there's two ways to tackle that. One is, and again, it becomes almost a I guess a question of how much time we're willing to put into maintenance of stalls, right? So do we add small amounts of bedding very frequently, right? And that's one way of doing it, is to make sure that the bedding's fresh all the time and do that on a regular basis. Again, that becomes a labor issue, and realizing that that's tough to manage as well. We need to find ways of keeping that bedding there as well. And so I have seen in stalls that have hard surfaces, so basically not deep bedded systems, where they either have a concrete base or a hard rubber base or even a mattress base, where they modify that to actually increase the amount of bedding by putting something at the back of the stall, like some kind of bedding keeper. There's commercially available ones. There's simple things. There's simply by putting a piece of wood there or a piece of PVC pipe there to be able to try keep that bedding in there. The only thing that we have to realize then is that by making that step up into the stall, making that curb a little bit higher, we increase the risk of other things. So again, if the stalls are short and you've got that at the end, there's a potential there, particularly if whatever you've added is very abrasive, that again, the cows are going to be rubbing their legs up against that, and it might make them more difficult to get up and down. So again, they only help so much in as much as in cases where maybe the stall isn't long enough, right? And so then we need to think about lengthening the stall as well. pushing the brisket board forward and the neck rail forward as much as possible so that we can get the cow further into that stall so that we can, keep the bedding at the back and make sure that the cow can get over that. And then again, the height of the curb at the back of the stall as well. So it's okay if you've only got a very low curb, I'd say 4 to 6 inches, and you add a bedding keeper, it's not so bad. But if you're starting with a curb that's already 8 to 10 inches high and you start adding something, it becomes very high, and it becomes very difficult for the cow to get into as well. And cows don't like high steps. They don't like walking up and stepping over very high things. So the higher you make that, again, the more difficult it's going to be for the cow to...
It's always a question of compromise.
Yes.
So, and we're going to discuss that into a lot of details in the next 2 webinars. So it really is, we hope you will be there with us. Don't forget to register because you need to register for every single webinar. And up until then, don't forget to do your homework and have your results on hand when we ask you the questions on March 31st. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Notre spectateur. All right.